to for quite a while because these are two real Northshire staff favorite books. We have two amazing authors, both joining us from outside of the United States tonight, which is very cool. Nguyễn Phan Quế Mai is here tonight from Jakarta, where it is 6 in the morning. So thank you for getting up early for us. And she's here tonight celebrating her first English language novel, The Mountains Sing, a riveting work of historical fiction that's been a huge favorite among our booksellers. She's also the author of 8 books of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction in Vietnamese, and her writing has been translated and published in more than 10 countries, most recently in Norton's Inheriting the War anthology. She's been honored with many awards over her career, including the Hanoi Writers Association's Poetry of the Year Award in 2010. And Natalie Jenner is here tonight to tell us about her debut novel, the national bestseller, The Jane Austen Society. This is a book that celebrates the power of the written word and the way that books build community and enrich our lives. It was no surprise after reading this book to learn that she's a former book owner, because bookstore people really know about books building community. So it is a great honor and delight to welcome both Quế Mai and Natalie to Northshire Live.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel and David and Northshire Bookstore for having us. And it's such a great honor to be in conversation with Natalie. Actually, you know, 5 days after the launch of Natalie's book, I messaged her and I said, I'm so in love with your book, you know. And then she told me that it was very hard to promote. She found it hard to promote books at that time because it was at the end of May and so many sad things were happening around that time. And for me, actually, books like the Jane Austen Society saved me because during that time, I was evacuated from Indonesia to Germany, and I was very depressed. I felt traumatized, and you know, this novel provided me an escape. You know, I felt instantly transported into another world where I became, you know, one of the players in the books. I could, in the book, I could listen to their stories, and I got lost and forgot about my daily problems and the bigger problems of the world. And the ending was just so satisfying. You know, like there was a love story in the novel, in Natalie's novel, that reminded me so much of my first love. Believe it or not, you know, the first boy that I liked, I used to cycle past his house and I never told him. So you know, it reminded so much of Vietnam, of, you know, of things throughout my life, but it brought up so many important issues in life, how book help to heal people and bring people together and empower people to do something bigger than themselves. So I'm really honored to be here. Thank you, Natalie.
And if I start talking, will I show up bigger? Rachel, I never know how this works. I'm in gallery view. So can you guys see me? I look very small right now. Yeah, good. Okay. I am so excited to finally get to talk to Quế Mai live tonight. When she reached out to me, her book had already been released and it was getting the most incredible critical accolades. And I was paying attention to the story behind her book, because it was obvious that she had gone through a lot and I had gone through a lot as well. And books had really, I think, saved us. And we both wrote debut books that are essentially about how books can connect people and can save you and give you solace in times of trouble. What was really interesting to me was that when she reached out to me after my book had released at the end of May at such a difficult time, I really felt an immediate connection to her as a person, as a human being, but also as an author, because I knew that our books could, in a really, really small way, help some people right now. And that made promoting the book easier because there's no way to sugarcoat it. It was such a horrible and continues to be such a difficult and horrible time. So I feel like we've bonded as debut authors already, because we are women of a certain age. Our children are grown, and this is, for me, a brand new career as a writer. And obviously Quế Mai is very established as a poet, and this being her first book in English. But there's some novelty to that, I would think. So it's been a wonderful experience. And I would say that as difficult as it's been promoting the book, and Quế Mai, I'd be interested to know how you felt, that the world is kind of coming to us a little bit with these types of events. And it really helped me doing these events and connecting with people, albeit virtually. And I was wondering, how did you feel as a debut author launching, you know, right in the middle of the, like the beginning of it? Where else were you getting solace from? And what, not just my book, but like generally speaking, what, you know, how did reading help you again?
I mean, like you said, you know, we have been working so hard all our lives for this book, right? And it was launched into such a difficult time. And I must say, as the Vietnamese proverb goes, là trong cây rủi có cây may, bad luck hides inside, good luck hides inside bad luck. Because, you know, thanks to the situation now, I'm able to do such a special virtual event with you. And then I realized the importance of small things in life again. I rediscovered the joy of reading. Before that, I was so busy, you know, meeting friends or going out. Yeah. I haven't read so many books as I have in the past months, you know. I kept discovering new books and opening my horizon to so many things. For example, one of my favorite read recently is The Vanishing Half, and I just so astonished, you know, so many complex issues are brought together inside that book. So yes, I have really enjoyed all the virtual events, you know, and getting feedbacks from readers. This morning I opened my email to see, you know, a request from a librarian, and she told me her area is hard hit by the COVID, and the people are so, and they have a lot of senior citizens, and the people are so distressed. And she asked, would you do an event for us? And I immediately said, yes, this is what I want to do, you know. And I feel very honored to be able to help people at this time. So how has it been for you, Natalie? I mean, your because when I read the novel, I said, this book is going to be so popular because it's so well written, and it's so vivid, and the prose is so alive, and I was sure it was going to be really popular, and I'm thrilled. It has been on so many bestsellers lists everywhere and chosen as best book of the year. So how do you feel, and how has it been with your interaction with readers?
Well, I don't think anyone can prepare you for waking up, turning on your email and getting a message from someone. Sorry, I'm gonna get a little emotional, where the person says like, I couldn't read, or my mother is suffering from Alzheimer's and this got me through. And it's like this, the greatest privilege you will ever have as a human being. And I think what's so great about books is that they allow us to get inside someone else's consciousness in a way that other art forms don't. And you especially would notice, I think, as a poet and as someone that can write in, you know, more than one language, there's something so special about that. It brings you so close. It's so intimate. So for me, being on the bestseller list, I won't lie, it's a thrill. It's one of those things that when it happens, you're kind of like, everyone congratulates you and you just feel this support and excitement, and it's really fun. But then it ends really fast. And what's really left are those anecdotes, those stories, those emails from people. They're so meaningful, and they're what keep you going. And they're, I think, what motivate us as writers to want to keep exploring, because you know that what you're doing can help someone see things differently. What I loved about The Mountains Sing, Quế Mai's book, is that, you know, I was reading this book about Vietnam, about decades in Vietnam's history that I was not that familiar with, the 50s with the Land Reform Act, you know, much more familiar as a North American with the Vietnam War, but really was reading through it, getting sucked in right away in that first chapter, just the emotion of the grandmother and the granddaughter, and just what they're having to do to survive. And I remember reading along and being very overwhelmed by what I was learning about history. And then there was this moment, and I'll never forget how I felt, where you mentioned Little House on the Prairie. And sorry, I'll get a little emotional again, but the minute I read the words Little House on the Prairie, something happened to me, and I went, oh my God, like we're all the same.
Yeah.
And it was this thing that I had tried exploring with my own book, right? And it was the most amazing feeling. And then the way the couple, Huang and her boyfriend at the end, how they bond, you know, over sharing books, which is exactly what one of the couples in my book does. And by the way, Quế Mai, I do have to let you know that in North America, when you drive by someone's house because you like them, we call it a drive-by. I didn't know if you knew that.
Okay, that's a new word for me.
Yeah, I am here to educate. So I do think that we're privileged as authors, and I have enjoyed every minute of this ride, and I am just going to try and just keep being very aware of all the great books coming out, read what I can, and support as many of the debuts, because Quế Mai and I are part of a debuts group. And it's a bunch of authors whose books released this year. And it's the most amazing group. And you get to read a lot of books that you wouldn't normally maybe have picked up. And so the whole experience of this year, as awful as it's been, has been, I think, on an emotional level, very satisfying and very rich. Would you say? Yeah.
I love our, you know, the debut 2020 has been one of the greatest discoveries of my publishing experiences. You know, we talk openly about everything there. You know, if one day somebody got a 1-star review, they said, okay, my first 1-star review, you guys, and we share each other's, you know, highs and lows, and the people, they are just fantastic. And the group is full of talented people. It's just so amazing to get to know the persons behind the books.
Yeah.
So, you know, Natalie, I remember reading one, you know, one of your characters was just saying that he was very lonely, but he felt understood inside a book. You know, when he opened the books, then he felt he was understood. And you know, that is my feeling as well. You know, sometimes I'm lonely or depressed, or you know, or desperate, and then I find hope again in readings, like in your novel. So, but one of the things that makes me sad is that people nowadays, many of my friends don't read anymore. People become too busy with social media, or you know, our life is too noisy around us, and people find less time to stay focused on books. And what do you think our role is as writers, and what can we do as writers or as a community to foster the love of reading?
You know, it's interesting you asked that, because both our books are exactly about that. And that's one of the things we can do, is I think, is to write stories about the power of stories, because there is something about the beginning, middle, and end of a story, the arc, the catharsis, that you don't get with that quick tweet, or, you know, maybe even a video game. Like, there's different forms of entertainment, they serve different purposes. But what a story can do, like you said, Quế Mai, is it can work you through someone's mindset, see their struggles, and learn their lessons in kind of a safe space. And it helps you to grow as a person. And I think that that's just very important for people to realize. I opened my own bookstore, for example, because I was concerned about what I was seeing was a lack of interest in books. And when the children would come in, especially I had a children's corner, and when they would come in Saturday morning, you know, after their karate lesson, this was the stop they got to make with their parents. And it was building like a ritual around reading as well. And you can't read, I don't think, and really immerse yourself in a book if you're doing 5 other things at the same time. And I do think that there's a mindfulness that just generally we as a society kind of, you know, do have to try and get back to. I was wondering, like with you, when you read, you had mentioned finding hope, which I think both our books are very much about trying to hold on to hope when the world is literally giving you the most hopeless situation, and you're like, I've got to somehow find a way to stay engaged and keep moving forward. And I was wondering, from your perspective, when you read a book, what do you think is working the most to help the reader bond, or to help the reader fall in love with the story? What is the technique or the element that is most lasting for you when you read a book? Is it the people? Is it like an exciting plot?
You know, what I most look for in a book is a combination of language and plot. when I read a book, instantly I have a feeling whether the person is a good writer or not, you know.
Yeah.
For example, in your novel, I could immediately smell the countryside of England, you know. I could hear the leaves rustling in the winds. I could hear the bell of the animals, and it's just the setting is so vivid, and the language is so poetic, and the characters were just so alive that I couldn't help but, you know, fall into the story immediately and grow roots into each page of your novel. So I think, and you know, I love surprises, you know. So that's the thing about a good plot, you know. The ending of your novel brought so many things together in a way that really surprised me. So, you know, for example, so I was telling a friend that for the Vanishing Half, for example, I love the Vanishing Half because the language is so wonderful, so deep and meaningful. It takes, you know, the way that I think because I write in two languages, so I look at the differences and the similarities, you know, in Vietnamese and in English, and I think, you know, each language has so many layers, and our one of the best parts of being a writer is to uncover these layers and bring them to the surface, or to give a hint to what exists under each word, you know. So yeah, so I love both language and plot as a combination.
And it's interesting you say that because those are my favorite elements too. And I think that's one of the reasons that we related to each other's books. But as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that you didn't learn English until you were a teenager. Is that right?
Yes.
And you're a poet. So have you heard of the Canadian author Michael Ondaatje? He wrote The English Patient.
Yes.
He's a poet originally, and he had a book that came out, oh gosh, was it Coming Through Slaughter? I think it was Coming Through Slaughter, where as a poet, he put all these poems on the ground and then just sort of randomly picked them up and kind of stitched them into a book. It was almost like a free-form exercise. And I think that your attraction to voice and language is stemming from the fact that you've had to be hyper-tuned and hypersensitive to the choice of words, because you are fluent in you know, more than one language. I'm not. I can barely do English, you know. But the other thing about what I do is I have a legal background. So I was a practicing lawyer, and having gone to law school, one of the things you learn, you're reading for 10 hours a day and you are parsing text, and you are seeing a Supreme Court decision turn on the presence or absence of a comma in a line of legislation. And that makes you as well hypersensitive and hyper in tune with the importance of every element of a sentence. So although I think you and I come at it from different ways, I think our styles are similar in that I do find they're pretty efficient. And I think our voice is on the more trying to make sure that the words that we do choose are evocative. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, yes. I think, you know, it's not, I think both the language and the expertise in life is important. You know, now that you know, I remember when I was reading the JANE AUSTEN Society, at the part where you write about the setting up of the society and the legal procedures, I was so impressed. I thought, huh? She knows about this so well. She must have consulted a legal expert. I didn't know you were a lawyer. So I want to ask you, so you know, you had a high-flying career in the legal world. You worked for more than 20 years as a lawyer, as a coach, as a consultant for, you know, for leading law firms in Canada. So why did you decide to become a writer, and what does being a writer mean to you?
You know, I think when people ask me about this journey, I would say the greatest thing for me is having an excuse to write. I've written, this is my 6th book. So my other books are firmly locked away in a drawer, but I wrote them around other jobs, or my daughter when I was raising her, like from 5 to 7 in the morning. But I always wanted to be a writer. Queen, I'm sure you're the same way. I wanted to explore things through language, through words. From the time I was learning language, you know, age 2 or 3, I was just becoming very interested early on. And I wanted to be a writer. I would have loved in the 80s to go to the Iowa Writers Workshop. But parentally approved path was law school. I'm from a family of actuaries and mathematicians. So I knew if I went to law school, I could study whatever the heck I wanted in undergrad. So I did film studies and English literature, which was a blast. And then suddenly I had this legal career. And it wasn't leaving me enough time. So I left the practice because I wanted time to write. And the reason I wanted time to write and what being a writer means to me is an excuse to get to know myself better in the most fun and unthreatening way possible, almost like free literary therapy. And Joan Didion, the American essayist and writer, she once wrote, "I write because I am not self-aware." And I was like, oh yeah, that's me. I don't know what's going on. But the minute I start to write and create characters, I can step back afterwards and I can look back and go, oh, you're a little bit like that one. And that's the way you react when that happens. And that's like, for me, the gift of writing and why I'm so thrilled to be able to make this at age, you know, my early 50s, to be able to make this possibly, you know, a new career. But I think I would always write even if I couldn't sell books, because I do think it does allow me to get closer to myself in a way that just seems to be more palatable for me. Now, for you, you've done the most incredible work with refugees and citizens who've been displaced within society. And you have worked from the international human rights side, you know, of the law. And you've been doing this for decades. So I was curious about, in terms of your career experiences, I've interviewed thousands of lawyers at this point. Did working with, supporting, and trying to empower so many people for you, did it inform how you wanted to approach writing or how you approach character or dialogue? And I was curious to know, because I think I know the answer, but.
I mean, definitely. I think all of my life experiences came together into this book. You mentioned that writing is getting to know yourself. And this is how I feel. Writing is not just about conveying the story, but getting to know the underlying emotions underneath and what does an event means to you as a person, and to your family or to your community. And I was really privileged to be able to work as consultant for UN agencies in Vietnam. So I interviewed, I did research on victims of the war, and I worked as a volunteer, for people who were affected by the war. For example, the victims of Agent Orange. I saw so much drama, so much healing that needs to be done. And the issue that in Vietnam, the official policy is that we won the war, so there's no drama. We should be proud of our victory and so forth. So there have been stories. There are stories that have been silenced, and I felt a duty to unsilence these stories, so that because our history, regardless of how difficult it is, offers valuable lessons for us as human beings. We have to grow from our mistakes, so we can build a better future, so that we can come together. And so I think writing has been my healing process as well. For example, my grandma was killed in the Great Hunger of 1945, and I don't have any photo of my grandparents, of my grandmothers. So I wanted with this book to imagine my grandma's stories of her life, of her dreams, of her hopes. And I wanted to imagine the person who had killed her. And I had wished for so many bad things on him, because I was full of sorrow, I was full of anger, and I dig deep into these emotions. And you know what I found? I found the need to forgive, because there's so many as human beings, we are prone to mistakes. So, you know, so I realized the need to forgive myself for those mistakes and forgive the others. And I wanted to highlight the power of empathy also in my novel, because, you know, I wanted to look at things from the other people's perspective. For example, I addressed the Vietnam War in my novel, and I wanted to look at America as a nation, you know, and not just as the enemy of Vietnamese people during the war. So you know, there was just so much that I gained through writing. And as you said, even if I couldn't sell this book, I could continue to write, because writing is therapy for myself. And I felt the need to connect to myself at a deeper level through my writing.
You know, it's interesting because I relate to that so well. And, you know, in my book, I have these characters that are at the tail end of war. The trauma is almost behind them, and they're going to have to learn how to move forward, despite having sometimes lived through catastrophic loss. And so very similar in a way, also very different. And I remember I wrote my book at a time when my husband had been given a health diagnosis that was pretty dire and remains uncertain, but he's stable right now on treatment. But we don't know how much time we have. And I was having trouble living with that kind of a cloud hanging over me. And I was trying to distract myself. So I was taking trips, and I was reading a lot of Jane Austen, which is how this book came about. And I remember when I was writing the book that I wasn't processing, but I was doing the very thing that I was writing about my characters doing, which is just putting just enough back out there again that the world had something to work with to maybe give back to. And the great irony for me is that in writing about, you know, Adeline, for example, the school teacher and her loss, I am not fully healed. I don't think you heal from trauma completely. I think you learn to live with it. And just like you learn to live with grief, I think the hole is always there. And I think sometimes it gets bigger than at others. And I think sometimes, you know, you find joy in small moments, and other times it's harder. And I think that's the inevitable seesaw. But when I was writing the character of Adeline, I remember as I was writing her, I wasn't processing that I was talking about my own fears of losing, you know, my husband and child. And it was very interesting to me that afterwards I could look back and see that the very act of writing was reenacting what my own characters were going through. And that is incredibly helpful to me as a human being, and the gift of being a writer. And then for you and I both to have given years of our life and all this work to tell a story, essentially. And then to now have the privilege of hearing from people, like you said at the beginning, and getting those emails, and then getting to connect with people this way, is the very proof of the lesson of hope that I think both our books is trying to convey, which is it ain't over until it's over, you know? And I have a line in my book about how sometimes the world is giving you so much bad stuff and all you have is hope, but hope can be just enough. And I needed to learn that lesson. And there was a great line in Jane Austen where it's like a proverb almost, where the voice says, know your own happiness, or if you want another name, call it hope. You know, it's that element of our being that helps us move forward. And I love your book so much. I love especially the references to books. The descriptions of food were amazing. I love, though, the proverbs. I love the Vietnamese proverbs in that book that were strung throughout, because like you said about good luck hiding inside bad luck. Like these were things that have stayed with me and were so beautiful and gave me such an appreciation for Vietnamese culture, which I think was one of the gifts you've given the world. When I say this is an important book to people, I mean, this is a book that is showing people how a culture has, you know, suffered and been treated and survived, and the beautiful parts of that culture in one book. And it's not even like a crazy long book, Quế Mai, is it? Like, I think our books are both about 320 pages, you know?
Yes.
So it's astonishing to me what you pulled off. And I was wondering, I guess one of my last questions for you is in terms of structuring your book. I am so impressed by how you structured your novel. The alternating chapters worked so well to stay with those two characters, but then get into the backstories of various relatives at different times in history. And she is moving guys around in this book between, like, oh, I mean, by the end, we're talking, you know, 40, 50, 60 years, right? From like the 30s, I think. And I show you I was really glad in her book at the beginning that you had the family tree, because this is like all the characters in this book. It's astonishing. And you get to know them all right away, kind of similar to Jane Austen, how she can quickly sketch her characters. And I was wondering for you, the decision behind structuring your book with these alternating chapters in different time periods between the grandmother and the granddaughter, and how that kind of came about.
Before answering your question, I want to reconnect with your you know, with your words that you, with the words that you just said. I found it so moving that you found the courage and just and the strength to write your novel during the time when your husband had some health problems and you went through some crisis. And you know, when I read the book, I felt you are a strong person, like Adeline. Adeline is a school teacher who refused, you know, to abide by the rules, who taught literatures, which, you know, she decided to teach. And she reminded me of so many strong women in Vietnam, and some of them appear in my novel. And I think, you know, the strength of the women is so important through our history, you know, like for example, in Vietnam, there's terrible gender discrimination, but I think, as my book highlights, that the women are often the ones who bear the burden of trauma and difficulties, but who in wartime, they are the pillars of the family, of the returning soldiers. Yeah. And I hope that your husband is much better now. And I know that the success of your book is a big dose of medicine for him.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. It's like the ultimate distraction. There was a period there where every day he would wake up, the first thing he'd do is, I'm going on Google alerts. Like, what are you on now? And it was just such a joy to give him that. And I get a little emotional, but he thanked me last week because it's quieted down now, because the book was, you know, a May release, but it got, you know, attention in April, attention in May, attention in June. Like, you know, we have, you know, it's going to end, but it's quieting down. And my husband last week's like, says, I really appreciate now even more how much this experience, and by you putting yourself out there and sending this book off to agents after being rejected for 20 years by agents around the world. And I have an Excel spreadsheet that is frightening of just this total wall of silence, but I gave it that one last shot. It's just like my characters, you know, and that was what was so amazing to me, is that this was the one where the agent grabbed it right away. And, you know, he said something interesting, to go back to Women in War. My agent, when he got my book on I sent it out on a Saturday because I was so convinced nothing was going to happen. So I sent my queries out on a Saturday afternoon in the summer. And he emails me Monday and he says, I want an exclusive for a day. And then on Tuesday, he signs me. And he said, I get dozens of Jane Austen related queries a day, but nobody has done World War II. Now, I hadn't been strategic about that. I wasn't thinking historical fiction. The real life Jane Austen Society started in May, 80 years ago, 1940, in the middle of the Second World War for the British people. So that was one reason. I also wanted to set my book during war, Quế Mai, because you can relate to this with your characters, because I wanted my characters to be dealing with the kind of catastrophic loss that nobody could minimize. Nobody could go, well, you know, everyone gets divorced, or like, you know, this is like the kind of loss that you would be forgiven for never getting out of bed again. And yet our characters are put through the ringer by us, and they do their best to survive. And I really, really love the fact that the Woman in War theme has resonated for both of us. I've had response from I have a UK release. You're coming out in the UK in August from One World. And I came out in May from Orion. And there are a lot of women in England who have written to me and have said, one of the things I love about your book is its portrayal of women at a time when the men were away. Yes. And they were inhabiting roles they wouldn't traditionally been allowed to have access to. And they were rising to the occasion. And that's what I loved about your book too, is how the men were murdered, the men were gone, the men were missing, and the women really had to step in. And it's a beautiful testament, your book, to the strength of women over time, no matter their situation in life, no matter whether they're impoverished, educated, or wealthy. You know, they all have brought that maternal, outward planning, nurturing, but also hard inner strength, you know, which I love.
You know, I mean, one of the reasons why I had to write this book in English is that I was so frustrated at the Hollywood depiction of Vietnamese women in English language literature. You know, for example, you know, women of Vietnam are often depicted as you know, sexualized, as symbol, as opportunistic, as absent of trauma. You know, so I wanted to write against that kind of representation, and I felt, because, you know, throughout my life I grew up with women who were very strong, like Adeline in your novel, and so I wanted to write about characters who had impacted my life and who are so vital for the development of Vietnam until today. So to get back to your question about, you know, how I how I put this book together. It took me such a long time, actually 7 years. You know, so I used to wake up at about 2-3 o'clock in the morning. So my husband told me, you know, this book is going to kill you. Because, you know, there were times that I had little sleep because my characters were telling me we cannot rest unless our stories are told. So I was very compelled, you know, to have it finished regardless of how difficult it was. So actually the book came to me, I mean, from childhood I had always wanted to write you know, an account of a Vietnamese family, what they went through, you know, during our turbulent, you know, like during our history, throughout our history. But I didn't find the door to that world until one day I was traveling in a car, and then I was writing a novel at that time, and my first novel in English. And then I asked him how his experiences were during the war. And he said he was in Hanoi. And during 1972, when you know, American planes dropped bombs onto the city, and his parents had gone to Russia, and he was in Hanoi alone with his grandma. So he told me about the bombing experiences, and I was so moved, because this was a man who was a Buddhist, and he was always so calm. You know, we was practicing kick, poke, chop, self-defense classes, as I wrote in my novel, and he was always, you know, very calm, very controlled. I had no experience, I had no idea that he had gone through so much. So that night I came home, and then I Googled about the bombings of Hanoi, and I heard the sirens and the broadcast about the bombing rates, and I was so moved. I was like weeping, and then I penned 2,000 words that night, which would become the first chapter of the novel. But I had no idea how I would put the story together. I created a grandma whom I always wanted to have, and I put myself into the character of the granddaughter Hương. And I had an idea of building a big family for them, and each member of the family would witness a major historical event of our country. But
brilliant.
Yeah, but you know, so I trusted my imagination, and each day I worked on it. And you know, like at that time I was doing a master in creative writing degree, and I used it for my master's. And my supervisor, Sarah Maitland, she told me, trust the power of your inner mind. And that's the greatest joy of being a writer, right? You wake up each day and you don't know what harvest you're going to have with your writing. You know, you begin with a blank page, and you don't know what fruits and flowers you can grow on that page until the end of the day, or until so many years later when your book is done.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
sorry, I was just going to say, I get up at 5 to write, not 2:30, but my husband said he can feel the energy rising off of me. And he says, I can feel that your characters are having conversations and that you have to, because my books are very dialogue heavy and always have a lot of different characters. And I like you, I like having characters that are kind of bouncing off each other and eliminating different aspects of each other's personalities and traits. It's just richer for me as a writer to have so many people to bond with and to care about. And I do feel that I don't plot at all. So I start to write in the morning, and it sounds like you do. I did not know this about you, but that's what I love is like, I don't really know what I'm about to do until it happens. And the high of when you look back and you can see. For me, for example, I've told the story, and like I've done many events, as we were talking about earlier, and I've told the story so many times, but I did not intend for Evie, the servant girl, to be a big character in my book. And she was going to be a servant girl that had to leave the village school, and she's working in the big house, so she was going to be just giving some insight into what's going on in the main house of the book. And then the third time I wrote the words, and Frances, you know, passed Evie on her way to dust in the library. And one day I pushed back from my desk and I went, what the heck is Evie doing in the library? Like, and I didn't have an intent at all to have this plot line that she was secretly cataloging it. And when it happened, I looked back on the first 60 to 100 pages of the book, and I saw the little, sort of like little clues I'd left my creative subconscious mind. Like, it doesn't get, Quế Mai, wouldn't you agree, any better than that, right?
Yes, exactly. I don't know, you know, like, so I think I have thousands of drafts for this novel, right? And each time you read it, you discover a small gap somewhere, and you can build a bridge to a future page. Yeah. So, you know, it's the joy is to make, you know, those different connections that tie everything together. And this is the greatest joy, but also the greatest challenge, because when you put such a complex story out there, sometimes it's so messy. So it's about, you know, editing, it's about tidying up and trusting yourself as a writer. And you cannot write a novel unless you trust yourself and your creativity that you can do this, because so many people begin writing novels, but they never finish. So if you plan to write, just write it. Just believe in yourself, because only you can write your own stories. So you know, you have eight main characters in the book.
Yeah.
So I want to ask, did your first draft have these characters? Did you have to kill some characters?
No, this is the embarrassing lawyer in me. I knew 3 things when I was going to sit down and write again. So I'd spent a year doing a lot of unintentional research on Jane Austen to distract myself from my husband's medical crises. And I took a trip to the village, you know, where she had lived on my own. It was the 200th anniversary of her death. About 8 months later, my husband was on some experimental and expensive drug treatment protocols that were starting to stabilize his lung decline. So he still remains healthful right now, and he's still able to live, although we're in lockdown, he's still able to live a healthful life, and we're very blessed. But when I sat down to write, I said to my family, I'm going to write about a group of people that come together to save Jane Austen's house, which is literally what's written across like the back of my book. Like, it was that much of a lightning bolt. But then the other thing I remember doing was, I knew I was going to call it the Jane Austen Society. So I have a journal that I kept, and it's got 3 pages in it. And I actually found it in my shed today because I was getting ready. So the first page was the Jane Austen Society, a new novel by Natalie Jenner. Because I always do that little kid thing, you know, when you were little and you were writing books. And then the second page was 8 to 10 characters, a historian, a journalist, an heiress, a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer. and I knew, so they didn't all make the cut, but I knew that there was going to be about 8 people, and I wanted them split equally between men and women, because your book, with its beautiful achievement of showing the strength of women in times of trauma, for me with my book, one of the things I wanted to do was reclaim Austen's legacy for men as well as women, because popular culture has to have shorthand. It has to be able to easily contain the many different things coming at us. And she has been a bit, you know, appropriated as a sort of a bit of a romantic, happy ending, period drama, chick lit, Bridget Jones' Diary, all of which I totally adore and love. but she's being put a little bit in that box by popular culture. And I wanted to kind of show, because I'd learned from my research, how many men over time have been some of her biggest and most vocal fans. So I knew there were going to be half men and half women. And embarrassing to admit, I didn't know anything that was going to happen in my book, but those 8 people survived. And I let them drive the bus. I didn't even have a seat on the bus. I was being pulled around behind. Like, I just went for a ride, and that's how I wrote. So, yeah.
You know, that's one of the things that I have learned as a writer, you know, trust your characters and listen to their voices, and they will tell you where to go, you know. So this is fascinating, you know, the world of imagination. So I think we can go on talking forever, but I want to give time for the audience to ask questions. Thank you so much for being here. You know, it's really a huge privilege to have you in the audience. Thank you so much.
This has been a wonderful conversation. Yes. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, please, if you have any questions, enter them into the chat or let Rachel and I know. We'll be happy to turn the screen on to you and unmute you if you do. But I had a question for both of y'all. And I was wondering, what have you been working on now? So I know it's, of course, running the publicity for the book is its own job. But have you been writing in this time since its publication?
Natalie, you go first.
Yeah, I have been. I've been starting, I've been doing research, because research is something that's just a bit more passive. You know, it's a little bit more porous. You don't have to be so strategic and on when you're doing it the way you have to when you're writing. So when you're in the middle of launching the book, I found I took the month of May off. I told my agent, I'm taking my pub month off in terms of creative writing, and I'm just going to really enjoy every element of the launch and the release. And I did research at the same time. And then around the end of June, it was like exactly 1 month after my release date. And my agent and I were on the phone, and I went, so I've been thinking. And he's like, I knew it. I knew you had something. So I have started writing, and I'm probably only about an 1/8 or a 9th of the way through. But I'm very excited. It's historical fiction. So to tie up my answer, it's set in 1950s. It's set in London, England again. There will be a lot of characters. There will be mystery. There will be books, and I'm very excited about it. So that's what I'm doing. And Quế Mai, how about you? What kind of writing are you exploring right now?
So I'm also working on the second novel, and it's also about the long-lasting impact of the Vietnam War. So my second novel is about Amerasians, the children of American soldiers and Vietnamese women who were born and abandoned during the war. So through my research, I found that they are the forgotten victims of the Vietnam War. So there's a lot of emotions, a lot of drama in that second book as well. And so I'm really excited about it. Yeah. So I think the challenge is how to, you know, give time to your readers, but still have that silence that you need to work on your own.
My sister always says, like, because I'd written all these other books, and then I took what I call my quiet year, where I just did a lot of reading. She goes, maybe, Natalie, you needed to shut up for a year to write your book.
Yeah.
So we have a question in the chat from Catherine Golden, who is a professor at Skidmore College here in town. Hi, Catherine. And she has a question for Natalie. She says, I loved your book and plan to teach it in the course this fall, but I have one question. What motivated you to fictionalize the creation of the society founded in 1940 by Dorothy Darnell? Were you consciously changing the history of the organization, and if so, how and why?
So that's a really great question. I wanted to mostly explore people in a difficult time, such as the Second World War, coping with trauma and using books for solace. And I had done all this research on Jane Austen, and I had originally intended to write a book about a group of people trying to save an old house, because I'd also been watching a lot of Downton Abbey. So Catherine and I hadn't actually originally known it was going to be about Jane Austen's house. And then I went to my first Jane Austen Society conference in Philadelphia, and the speakers were talking about grief and how it's woven through many of Austen's books. And something about that and my original spark of the idea And the fact that I'd learned a bit about the history of Orchard House as well in Concord, Massachusetts, and how Louisa May Alcott's sister's sons had donated the furniture. It was a group of women that had saved that house. And I became very interested in the idea of people banding together. But I didn't want to, as a former lawyer, I didn't want to appropriate real people and try and cut them, their feelings, their emotions to fit the story. So in order to explore these larger themes of resonance emotionally and historically, for me as a writer, I knew that my imagination was going to create and be most effective if I felt completely free to let my characters do whatever they needed to do. And so that was the spark of the idea, behind that. And that was why my book evolved the way that it did.
Thank you. We've got a question for both of you from Eddie, also in the chat here.
Eddie!
What advice would you have for writers who want to set their stories in a different time or location than their own? How do you approach the research, and where do you draw the line between fact and fiction?
Thank you, Eddie, for being here. Actually, I want to acknowledge, some of the writers from our debut group, Julie, Eddie, and Jody, who are here to give us support. We are in a brilliant and really supportive group, and I love our members and our friends. Thank you, Eddie, for the question. So actually, writing historical research, writing historical fiction is a tricky one. You have to balance between the facts and your imagination, and how do you justify the changes you make to certain historical events, because you just wanted to be free in your imagination as well. So for me as a historical fiction writer, I felt the research is so important in getting background knowledge about a particular period where you did not experience yourself, and then use all of that and elevate it with your imagination and with your language to bring that period alive through your characters, through your story, and through your language. I think so. The question is how do you approach the research, and when do you draw the line? These are hard questions. I could write a PhD thesis about it. But I think I think for me it's important to talk to the witnesses. When I deal with Vietnamese history, which is very complicated, and there are so many versions of Vietnamese history as perceived by people who have lived through it. So I think it's important for me to listen and to document different points of view, and also understand the emotions from the people who experiences these events. I used to make films, and one of the film's producers told me, you cannot make a good film unless your hands tremble behind the camera. So I think it's all about, connecting with the past, with the past, and then, growing the emotions so that they are ripe enough so that you can cultivate a story out of it. Natalie, how about you?
It's interesting because I had, like I said earlier, done this year of unintentional research, but thinking about what Professor Golan had been asking earlier, I approach historical fiction where I feel I have to really live the history. So I want to immerse myself in it completely and do nothing but read about that time period. I want to get that all done up front. I will backfill later, but I want to do it intensely. I want to live it completely so that when I do sit down to write, it's kind of like my back seat driver. It's behind me now, and now my characters can push it forward. And Susie Ornenschnall has a book called, I'm going to forget. I always forget the names of everything when I'm like yakking. We Came Here to Shine. So she's the same way. But when we do sit down to write, it's intense because all this year and your years of research is kind of fueling you. And sometimes you're not sure where it's coming from. But what you're really aspiring to in terms of Eddie drawing the line is I think you're trying to capture the meaning of the events for people, the meaning of the experience, what we can take from it, what they took from it, to respect their struggle, and to be able to communicate that in an artistic way that grows people's empathy and understanding. And sometimes I feel as an artist that however you get there is fine if you get that result.
Yeah.
So I have a slightly fluffy question. But Natalie, I really enjoyed in your book the way that each character, one of the little almost shorthands for them is that they each have a favorite Austen novel and Austen heroine. And I myself am very much a Persuasion Anne Elliot girl. And I wondered if you have a favorite Austen novel and heroine.
Yeah, I love Pride and Prejudice because it was my first. I was young, I was 9 or 10, and it has that first love aura about it where you really get suckered into something and you can't believe it exists in the world. And you're like, why aren't there more like this? And you almost spend the rest of your life trying to find that feeling again of reading that book. Well, that was Pride and Prejudice for me. And then hand in hand with that, my favorite heroine is Elizabeth Bennet. Just like Jane Austen herself, I do think she's the most sparkling, delightful. I would love to be friends with her. I just think everyone that got to know her was just so lucky. But I have, you know, really grown in my respect for Fanny Price from Mansfield Park over time. Anne Elliot is sort of a really nice kind of conduit between those two personality extremes. Elizabeth is almost all charisma, and Fanny is almost true to herself and to her lack of charisma. And Anne Elliot in between is somebody who has led other people toward her potential and who has entranced Captain Wentworth at a very young age and has deprived herself through her fear of disappointing her family and her own grief over her mother's loss from being fully herself and this fully engaging person. But the people around her know how special she is. They confide in her, they ask for her advice, they lean on her. And I think Anne is sort of my second favorite. And so I agree with you on that.
And we are just about out of time, but I do have one quick question to finish off for Quế Mai, which is, you know, you've had a long career writing in Vietnamese. Do you have any plans to write a Vietnamese translation of this novel?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. I've had different publishers in Vietnam approaching me, asking whether they can publish the novel. So I like to translate it myself one day. Yeah, when I have finished the second book, because I think I've written this story for Vietnamese people, and it's important that it's available in Vietnam so my parents and my relatives can read it. So I'm excited about that. Thank you.
Wonderful. We are unfortunately out of time. This has been a lovely evening, but I have really enjoyed hearing from both of you, and I think the audience has as well. Thank you so much for being here from Indonesia and from Canada. It is, as you both said, one of the silver linings of this time that we can be together even far away. So thank you very, very much, both of you. And thank you all of you in the audience for being here tonight. We'll see you again soon. We'll be back next week for a couple more Great Northshire Lives. We have a mystery sampler on Tuesday and a romance happy hour on Thursday of next week. So come on back and we'll see you then. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you all so much. This has been a real pleasure. Y'all take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel and David.
Thank you so much, Quế Mai and Natalie.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Great.
you.